in as a buffer, he sees a gift of looking at his Chedushim. And he looks at it and he says, did you write this? And he said, yeah. He said, you keep writing? And one day we're going to publish it.
Something like that? That's right? I might not be accurate.
Until they would have been thrown out for doing that. Anyway. Rabbi Leff, who is a noted author, after many years he did publish and speaks around the world on many, many subjects. And Baruch Hashem, I want to tell you, we've had a discussion with the issue of Torah Misinai, our story, who we are, where we come from. We brought in many speakers over the years, and Baruch Hashem, we finally settled on Rabbi Leff, and we've had him for quite a number of years now. Baruch Hashem. So with that, I was Zohar Baruch Hashem to learn that the Talmud with Rabbi Leff, we went to the whole Nefesh Chaim. Baruch Hashem. So I feel like a Talmud very much so. My brother, my parents live on the Moshav. So with that, everyone please give me your full attention.
Will there be time for questions afterwards? Yes. When we go straight and then we'll have snacks, yes. He's not running any place, he's giving a speech upstairs afterwards. He's the only speaker that's speaking to both groups. All right, have a group speaker.
I just want to make two corrections. First of all, I don't consider Rabbi David a Talmud, but a Chav. Very good.
Yeah, you see what an honor?
I know. Secondly, that the introduction was very nice, but I'll tell you what I really can give you and why I think I was invited here. When I was a rabbi in Miami many years ago, I used to give my drushes on Shabbos morning. And one Sunday morning, one of my balabatim said to me, Rabbi, you should know, I didn't sleep all Motzei Shabbos because of your drusha. I said, I'm flattered that it made such an impression on you that it didn't let you sleep all night. He said, not exactly. He said, whenever I sleep in the daytime, I have a hard time sleeping at night. I learned from that I have the power to put people to sleep when I speak. And I assume that this is a very intense day. You're going from one speaker to another, and they figured that you need a little rest. So they invited me here to speak. This way you can have a little rest for a while and be awake for the next speaker. If I accomplish that, that's fine. If you are hardcore insomniacs and they won't be able to sleep through this, you're going to have to hear some different Torah. Let me first tell you what I didn't come here to do. I didn't come here to prove to you conclusively that the Torah is true. There is no one who can prove that conclusively to you, because it's a mitzvah to believe that the Torah is divine and the Torah is true. And since it's a mitzvah, you have to have free choice. Because if there would be no choice, if it would be as simple as 1 + 1 = 2, then there's no free choice. That is a fact. And if there wouldn't be any free choice, then there couldn't be a mitzvah. So since it is a mitzvah, there's always a makom litos. There's always a place to make a mistake and to say, no, I don't accept that proof. Can't prove there's a God 100%. Can't prove the Torah is true 100%. But if you want to believe, then what I'm going to tell you gives you a lot of strength and a lot of reason to, yes, believe. It backs up the belief a lot. But there's always a place to make a mistake. To give you a medrash that brings this idea out, the medrash says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was dictating the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, so they came to the pasuk, Na'aseh oda b'tzalmeinu kidmuseinu. Let us make man in our image, in the plural. Moshe said, I can't write this. You're giving an opening to people who believe in more than one God. You're giving an opening to the early Christians who believe in a Trinity. Here it says that let us make man. Obviously God is a plural. So the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe Rabbeinu, so you write what I told you. The harotza litos yiteh. Whoever wants to make a mistake, let him make a mistake. So they ask, God is not sensitive to causing people to make mistakes. Let him make mistakes. God commanded us, lifnei iver lo sitei michshol, not to put a stumbling block in front of the blind and do things that will make people make a mistake. So why doesn't God keep that to himself? So the Bali Musar explained what it means is the following. No one ever became an apikoros because it says Nasa Odom B'Tzalmenu. No first grader ever raised his hand when they came to that pasuk in Chumash and said, I have to go to the convent next down the block because it says God is plural. No seventh grader, second time to learn Chumash, Bereshis, ever became an apikoros. No Baal Tshuva opened a Chumash and became an apikoros because of that. They look at Rashi, and Rashi says, why does it say in the plural? Because God asked advice from the angels to teach us to ask advice, even from people lesser than us. And it's clear that it doesn't mean that God is plural, because the end of the pasuk says, Vayash Elokim in the singular. But apikoros, bring a proof from there. If you want to believe, you'll see the pasuk properly. If you don't want to believe, you could distort anything. You can always find a way out and a place to make a mistake. I remember when I was about your age, so I was learning in Cleveland, and I used to spend my Ben Azmanim in New York, because I lived in Miami, and it was too expensive to go back to Miami for Sukkot Ben Azmanim. And I stayed by a Rav in East Flatbush at the time. And he received a letter one year from a goy. This goy thought that he, the goy, was Mashiach. And this is way before the internet. And I don't want to get the word out that he's Mashiach. How do you let people know you're Mashiach? So he came up with an ingenious idea. He would write letters to clergymen, rabbis, priests, ministers, and with 10 conclusive proofs that he's Mashiach. And once he convinced this clergyman that he was Mashiach, he would say, now that you believe in me, could you please convince your congregation to believe in me too? So with one letter, he could reach tens, if not hundreds of people. I remember seeing the letter with the 10 conclusive proofs that he's Mashiach. I don't remember all of them, but one I do remember. The first one. His proof was the following. It says in Yeshayahu, when it describes Mashiach, that Mashiach will be Lamala mi Malachim. Translated into English, Mashiach will be above kings. He said that clearly means me. Why? Because in the apartment beneath me, there are 2 dogs named King. And that puts me above kings. So it clearly means me. So I'm clearly Mashiach. Harotza litos yiteh. Person wants to make a mistake and distort anything. But if you want to believe and you choose so, then there is a lot to support and back up that belief, and that's what we're going to talk about today. What is the support and the backup of believing in the Torah that it was given by the Rebbeinu Shalom? There are 2 mitzvahs, there are more, but 2 that I want to mention, of remembering. One is to remember Amalek, and the other one is to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. How many times a year, minimum, that you yotze the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek? How many times a year do you have to remember Amalek? Once. That's it. How many times a year do you have to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim? Every day, twice a day. In addition, many mitzvahs are Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Every Yom Tov is Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Every Shabbos, Tzitzis, Tefillin, Mezuzah, they're all Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Figure out, probably about 1,000 times a year, there's a mitzvah to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. Which do you think is more well known? The Exodus from Egypt or Amalek? Go into the street and ask somebody, did you ever hear of Amalek? Sorry, never heard of it. Did you ever hear of the Exodus from Egypt? Yeah, it was a movie they had. Remember the 10 Commandments. So why in the world would the Torah make us remember Yetzias Mitzrayim 1,000 times a year? How feeble-minded did God think we are that if we didn't remember Yetzias Mitzrayim 1,000 times a year, we'd forget it? Why 1,000 times a year? And I'm all like, one time is enough. The answer is that Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is comprised of the Makos in Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, and Matan Torah, that is called Yetzias Mitzrayim. All of that. That is the foundation of our belief. That there is a Torah that God gave us, and again, it doesn't prove conclusively. There's always a way out. But it supports our belief. If you choose to believe, it supports it. I told Rabbi Sinclair as he was walking out, I heard him say that there's a mitzvah to ask questions. And if you don't get the answer you want, ask somebody else. I agree with that, but there's one more part to that. Questions do not contradict Emunah, just the opposite. You're supposed to ask. You're supposed to want to understand. There's a naaseh, we'll do, whether we understand or not. But there's also a nishma, I'd like to understand as much as I can. With one condition, that it's not a prerequisite. If I don't understand it, that means I don't do it. That's not right. First, I have to accept the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom told me to do something. But after I accept it, now I want to understand it as much as possible. So, yes, you have questions. The holiday that we ask the most questions is Pesach. And Pesach is the holiday of Emunah. You would think on Pesach, questions are off limits. Don't ask any questions. You believe. No. If you really want to believe, you have to ask questions. You have to get answers. And if you don't get the answer you want, ask somebody else. But there's one more sentence. And if you don't get the answer from anyone, that doesn't mean that you don't believe. That means that perhaps we're not capable of understanding the answer. There are a lot of things in this world that our minds can't grasp. So there are things that there are no answers to. That doesn't mean you can't ask questions. So I'm going to give you what the Sfarim say is a great support to the divinity of the Torah and to the emes of the Torah. The Torah was given on Har Sinai just the way it describes it in the Torah. But again, it's not a proof conclusively. It's if you want to believe and you make that choice, this will give you a lot of strength and support. The Kuzri, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, in his introduction to Sefer HaKuzari, says the following. He says that basically we believe what Jews believe because we were born Jewish. And therefore, our parents told us, or if not our parents, a surrogate parent, meaning somebody from their generation, told us what they heard from their parents or their teachers who heard it from them, all the way back to the people who were there. So we believe in the tradition of Judaism. But if you were born a Christian, you would have heard from your parents what their parents or their teachers told them all the way back to the people who were there. So you believe in the Christian tradition. If you were born a Muslim, so you believe in the Muslim tradition. Comes out that our Emunah is basically an accident of birth. It happened to be, we're born Jewish, so we believe in the Jewish tradition. Had we been born Christian, we believe in the Christian tradition. And Muslims, we believe in that. Is there any significant difference between our tradition and theirs? Says the Kuzri, there's a tremendous basic difference between their tradition and ours. Yeah, it's all tradition handed down. But let's trace it back to its source. How strong is the source of that tradition? Let's start with Christianity. What is the foundation of Christianity? The basics of what they believe in. They believe that a person who was the embodiment of God, or the Son of God, was born. He came to atone for the sins of mankind, and he died, and he was resurrected. He came back to life. Those are the foundations of Christianity. Okay, how many people can testify that Yoshka was the son of God? Did anybody see God giving out cigars when he was born? No. So we don't know if he was the son of God or not. But he claimed to be the son of God. It's his word. Believe him, don't believe him. Anybody can say whatever they want. How about his resurrection? That he died and he came back. How many people witnessed that? So let's see what they say. In the New Testament it says that the people who witnessed the fact that he came back were a small group of his closest disciples and a group of swooning women. Swooning means they were fainting at the time. A person's fainting can see anything. So this is the entire testimony of Yoshka's resurrection. Right, is a group of people who had a vested interest to say he came back. Because if he didn't, they were out of a job. So they wanted to say he came back, but if he did or he didn't. And the women who claimed that they saw it were swooning at the time, according to them. They were fainting. They could have seen anything. That is the foundation of Christianity, if you trace it back to its source. Very, very shaky. Islam is even worse. What is the entire foundation of Islam? That Muhammad claimed to have a dream in a cave one night, that the angel Gabriel came to him and revealed to him the Quran and told him to start a new religion. Nobody videoed the dream. Nobody shared the dream with Muhammad. He may have had a dream. Maybe he had a stomachache or whatever. Nobody claims he didn't have a dream. But that the angel Gabriel came to him, who said? He claimed. Believe him, don't believe him. Muhammad had a very, very cogent philosophical argument that convinced many, many people to accept his religion. It went something like this: accept my religion or I'll cut off your head. And many people found that to be extremely convincing. So his religion spread like wildfire. The Rambam and the Ramban both say that the Rabbanu Shalom wanted these religions to spread. Why is not for now. And therefore they were successful. Christianity spread all over the world. Islam spread all over the world. But the foundation of both of those religions is very, very shaky. A chain of tradition is no stronger than its weakest link. And if the weakest link of the chain is the beginning link, it's very, very weak. So that is the foundation of Christianity, and Islam is something that either one person claimed or that a small group of people witnessed. Now, if our religion had been the same way, and Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Jewish people who were settled in Tel Aviv, and he said to them, listen, you got to hear what happened to us. Me and my brother and sister were backpacking through Egypt, and the Egyptians captured us and made us slaves. And we worked there for quite a few years, and finally God brought 10 plagues on the Egyptians, and he took us out of Egypt, and he split the Red Sea for us, and he gave us the Torah, and here it is, believe us. And our religion will be the same as theirs. Right? 3 people claiming what they saw, but Moshe didn't come and tell us, I saw these things. He said, Einechem haros, you all saw it. You witnessed the 10 plagues, and you witnessed Kriyas Yamsuf, and you heard the Rabbanu Shalom speak on Har Sinai, an entire nation. Very difficult to falsify something that's claimed that an entire nation saw it. In 1 second I'll tell you how it's possible to falsify that, and why any possibility of how we got that tradition, that an entire nation witnessed all of these things, all of the possibilities are improbable except one, that it really happened. Okay? How did we get a tradition that an entire nation witnessed all of these things? So there are a few possibilities. One is it really happened. And the people who were there, who witnessed all of this, passed it on, right, to the next generation, and that generation to the next one, until We all received it in our generation from those people who received it, from the ones who received it all the way back to the people who were there. That is one possibility. Second possibility. It never happened. Nobody ever witnessed these things. Moshe Rabbeinu convinced an entire nation that they saw things they didn't see. And they accepted that, and then they passed it on as if they saw it. But they never really saw it. Moshe Rabbeinu convinced them. He was a very convincing person, even though he stuttered and he couldn't speak very well. And the Sham Shofar says that's why he was chosen. That nobody should think that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to convince people because he was so eloquent a speaker. But in any case, there are people who say that. Moshe Rabbeinu convinced them. He mesmerized them. He hypnotized them. Whatever he did. And he convinced an entire nation that they saw all these things and they never saw it. And they were convinced so much that they passed it on to the next generation as if they saw it. And that's how it started. Very improbable. Possible, but improbable. Why? If I had come here today, shaking white as a sheet, and tell you that I can't really give you this class today. I am so shaken up by something that happened to me on the way here. And I just got to get it off my chest and tell you what happened. On the way here, I was driving on the highway. There were no other cars around. And all of a sudden, a flying saucer landed on my car. And out of that flying saucer came 10 little green men. They came out of the flying saucer, started dancing around my car, got back in their flying saucer, and took off. And I am still shaking from the experience. And I tell you, I promise you it happened. Now some of you may believe me, or at least have a doubt. Maybe it happened. How do I know? I don't look like I'm crazy. Right? I don't sound like I'm drunk. So maybe it happened. Possible. But what if I had come here today and told you, don't you remember, I was here last week in this room with all of you, and a flying saucer flew through that door, landed on this table, 10 little green men got out and danced around us. Would anybody here have even a doubt? No, because I'm telling you, you saw it. And you know you didn't see anything. And if any of you would have a doubt, I have a bridge in New York I'd like to sell you after the class. So in any case, nobody here would believe me or even have a doubt if I told you that you saw what you know you didn't see. So to convince an entire nation that they saw these wondrous things and nobody ever saw it, didn't happen. Very improbable. Especially since we're talking about Jews. Jews, it's hard to convince them they saw what they did see, let alone what they didn't see. And the Sham Shofar says one of the biggest proofs the Torah is true, because we accepted it. And we are very stubborn people. We didn't accept Islam and we didn't accept Christianity. It's very hard to convince us of anything. So if we believe that it must have happened. In any case, so that is improbable that Moshe Rabbeinu could have convinced an entire nation that they saw things they never saw. So that is one possibility, but it's improbable. Next possibility. It never happened. And nobody ever convinced them they saw things they didn't see. They made it up. The whole nation got together, and they made up this fantastic story. Why would they do such a thing? Because they were slaves in Egypt, and it's not a great heritage to give over to your children that we were a bunch of slaves. So they wanted to glorify their history and make their children proud of who they were. So they said, it's true, we were slaves, but you should know that God did wondrous things for us. Right? He brought 10 plagues on our masters, and He took us out of Egypt, and He split the Red Sea for us, and He gave us this Torah at Har Sinai, and therefore we're pretty special people. So be proud of being a Jew. Don't think that we're just a bunch of children of slaves and descendants of slaves. Okay, maybe. But they didn't just tell their children a nice story of history, but they tacked on a Torah. And the Torah had a lot of laws there that were very difficult to keep, especially for people of that time, because they went against the social norms of the time. One example, incest. In Mitzrayim, it was normal to marry your relatives. Okay? The Torah prohibited it. And the Chazal tell us that the Jewish people cried when they heard the Yisur, because many of them were married to relatives. Moshe Rabbeinu's father was married to his aunt, which the Torah prohibited. He got married before the Torah was given. It was okay. But once the Torah was given, he would have been ushered to live with him. So it was a very common thing to marry close relatives. The Torah prohibited. Torah prohibited eating shellfish and whatever, which was a common diet in Egypt. So they tacked on these laws, and they really knew that there was no basis for it. Now, to tell you the truth, I only get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and put little black boxes on my head and arm, because I believe that God said to do that, and it's in my best interest to do it in this world and for the next world. But if I thought for 1 minute that somebody made this up 3,000 years ago, right, I would never get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and put little black boxes on my arm and my head, because somebody 3,000 years ago made it up. Let him put it on it, not me. Here are parents who know fasting on Yom Kippur, Chametz on Pesach, the Isser of Arayis, the what's it called, Isser of eating things that are not permitted is all made up. They made it up. There's nothing to it. We made it all up. How do you voice that on your children? You know that what you're making them do, right, is something that has no basis to it. What kind of parent is that? And even if there are abusive parents in this world, but an entire nation of them, why would they do that? And even if they would do it, but before people die, they get guilt feelings and they want to come clean to things they've done wrong. That's why a deathbed confession is accepted in a court of law. Because at that time, people don't lie. So wouldn't you imagine that some of these fathers, mothers would call their children together before they died and say, listen, the black boxes, forget about it, we made it up. The fasting on Yom Kippur, forget about it, don't fast anymore, we made it up. Didn't happen. So to think that an entire nation could make up something like that and tack on a Torah to it and basically do things that are oppressive to their children for no reason, difficult. Again, it's possible, but it's very improbable. Okay, so we have now two possibilities that are improbable. That someone convinced an entire nation that they saw what they didn't see, or that the people themselves made it up. Next possibility. Nobody made it up. Nobody convinced the people who were there that they saw what they didn't see. It was made up 1,000 years later. So now we don't have to convince people they saw things they didn't see, because this is 1,000 years after it happened. Somebody decided to make this all up and convince the people then that it happened 1,000 years before. So we're not convincing them that they saw these things. We're convincing them that their forefathers saw it. They don't know one way or the other. And there are apikusim who say that. Ezra made up the whole Torah. 1,000 years later, Ezra came along. Why would he do such a thing? Also, the Jews were in a very sad state. They were in Gaulis and Bavel. And they really felt very low. And Ezra wanted to give them a glorious heritage. So he said, yeah, we're pretty low right now, but 1,000 years ago, you should know what God did for us. Took us out of Egypt, and he made these miracles, and he split the Red Sea, and he gave us the Torah, and here it is. And Ezra made up the whole thing, and he convinced the people of the time to believe in it. Very improbable, I'll tell you what. Imagine if I would come here today you all learned American history, at least the ones from America, or English history in school. So let me tell you something about American history that you probably don't know. I have discovered that there was a president of the United States somewhere between Roosevelt and Truman who was a Jew. His name was Schwartz. Okay? And I can tell you a lot about this President Schwartz. How many of you would believe that? Very few. Why? Because nobody ever heard of him, except me. He's not in any of the history books. He's not in any newspaper articles. No teacher ever taught you about that. So how in the world would you believe me that I know about something that no one else knows about? Wouldn't some Jew raise his hand and say, Ezra, if all of this is true, and all of this happened 1,000 years before, how come nobody ever heard of it? Because if it never happened, nobody could ever hear of it, if Ezra made it up. So if it never happened, and Ezra made it up, so nobody ever heard of it till then. It doesn't happen. So somebody's going to raise his hand and say, Ezra, if it really happened, how come there's no record of it? How come nobody ever heard about it? You're the only one. You've discovered this. And even if people would like to believe that that's what happened to their ancestors, and not ask any questions. Okay, Ezra gave us this beautiful history, but he also tacked on a Torah. And he told them, you know, you have to get rid of your non-Jewish spouses. And they did it. And you have to, a million different things, keep Shabbos and whatever. Now again, if it never happened and nobody ever heard about it, why in the world would an entire nation now accept it, not just to have a nice, glorious history, but to have to do things that were very difficult to do? So to say that Ezra made it up, no one ever heard of it before, it never happened, not that Ezra was mechazik them, and they had heard about the Torah, they knew about the Torah, but they were lax in it, so Ezra came and gave them Musa, and he gave them Tochacha, that makes sense. But that he revealed to them something never anyone ever heard of, made it up, and convinced them that it happened 1,000 years ago, even though nobody ever heard about it. And because of that, they have to do things that are very uncomfortable and very difficult to do, very possible, but improbable. So those are three possibilities, and they're all improbable. Now there's a fourth possibility, and that is not so improbable. And that's the following. It happened, but not the way the Torah says. It happened. Jews were overworked in Egypt, and they made a sit-down strike one day, and they got out, and when they got out, they jumped over a puddle, and then they made up some laws, and as it was given over thousands of years, it changed, and it got exaggerated. Not that they were just overworked, they were slaves. Not just that they made a sit-down strike and got out of Egypt, but God punished the Egyptians and brought 10 plagues. And it got exaggerated. You ever hear somebody who caught a minnow and it became a whale, you know, after telling it over a few times? Things get changed. They get exaggerated. We're talking about 1,000 years of people telling over this story. So maybe it got exaggerated. Maybe it happened very natural, no big deal. And over 1,000 years, people embellished it. And they exaggerated it. And that's how we receive this story, but it happened, but not the way the Torah said. And it developed into what we have as the Torah, and we have the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Do you ever play the game telephone? In England, they call it Chinese whispers. If you're from England, you ever hear of Chinese whispers? It's a parlor game. Okay, why they call it Chinese whispers, I have no idea. But there's a lot of things that the English do that I have no idea. In any case, but in America they call it telephone. What's the game? You have a line of 10 people. You whisper something to the first person in line, and you tell him, pass it over. And he whispers it to the second person and the third person, and you go to the 10th person in line and you ask him, what did you hear? And 99% of the time, what he heard has nothing to do with what the first message was. It's changed over and over again, and the last thing is completely distorted from what the first person said. This is fun. It's a joke. So we're talking about 10 people in the same room, and things don't get passed on authentically. So if you're talking about 1,000 years and people giving over a story, it makes sense that it could change. In fact, out of it, it's probably improbable that it didn't change. So maybe that's what happened. Maybe we'll have a tradition, but the tradition got exaggerated and changed over 1,000 years, until finally it was written down and we got the final distorted message from something that was not so wondrous to begin with. Why is that improbable? Let's go back to the game of telephone, and I'll show you why it's improbable. Imagine if you have 100 people playing telephone, 10 lines, 10 deep. Okay, you have person 1, 2, 3, 4 till 10, and back A, B, C, D till I. 10 lines, 10 people deep. And the given is that all 10 of them, the first people, were given the same message. We don't know what it was. But whatever it was the exact same message. The people who are given over the message on the front of the line all heard the same thing. That's a given. And then they're told to pass it on, back. Then we go to the 10th people in line, and we ask them what they heard. And they all tell us they heard the exact same thing. Now, we don't know. Is that exact same thing the same thing that started with the first 10 people? Or maybe it's changed. Which is more probable? If it changed, l'chora, it should have changed 10 different ways. And we should hear 10 different messages from the people in the back. If it didn't change, then just like the people in the front all heard the same thing, the people in the back report the same thing. But if it changed, it would have to change 10 times independently the same exact way that all 10 in the back should have the same message. So which is more probable? That it didn't change, and that's why they all have the same message, and it's the same message it started? Or that it changed, but it changed 10 times independently the same exact way? The first is more probable. Both are possible, but it's more probable. That means if the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim changed over 1,000 years, there should be 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 different versions. One version, the sea split. Another version, they scuba dived underneath. Another version, they built a bridge. 15 different, what really happened, they jumped over a puddle. But it got exaggerated and changed over 1,000 years. So how did it change? And we're not talking about one line of tradition. We're talking about tens, hundreds of lines of tradition, parents and children and so on, all over the world. If it changed, it should have changed 100 different ways. There should be 100 different versions of Kriyas Yamsuf. There's not. In details, there are differences. In Medrash and whatever. But was there a Kriyas Yamsuf? Did the sea split or not? There's only one version. There's not 15 different versions. Hold the questions deep. There should have been 15, 20, 30, 100 different versions of Kriyas Yamsuf. Did the sea split? Did they go scuba diving? Did they build a bridge? What happened? But there isn't any other version. There never was. Even the people who don't believe in the Masorah don't claim to have another one. They just don't believe in our tradition. The Tzedukim and the conservative and reform, all the groups throughout history, the Karoyim never claimed to have another Masorah. They just didn't believe in Masorah. But they didn't claim to have another one. We have a tradition all the way back that was different. Wasn't the way you said. And not only that, not only do we believe in it, the Christians also believe in Kriyas Yamsuf and Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the Muslims also believe it. And exactly the way that we do. I once had a woman come to me, she wanted to convert. So my first question to a prospective convert is, what religion are you now, and why aren't you happy with your religion? Why don't you stay where you are? Why do you want to convert to Judaism? So this woman told me she's a Catholic, and there are certain things that the Catholic religion forces them to believe in, and she can't swallow it, she can't accept it. So she wants to be Jewish. So I suppose she's talking about the fact that a human being could be God, or that a woman, right, a virgin could conceive, and some of the other fantastic things that Christianity believes in. So I asked her, can you give me one example of something the Catholic religion forces you to believe in which you can't accept? She said, yes, the splitting of the Red Sea. I said, I hate to tell you this, but we are the Jews, we're the ones who went through the Red Sea when it split. She says, you guys believe in that too? I said, yeah, and don't try to be a Muslim because they also believe in it. So that was the end of her conversion. But in any case, they also believe it. They don't have another version of it. They have the same Masorah we have, except they add to it. They added Yoshka and they added Mohammed, but up until then, they also believed in the same thing. They also have the Old Testament tacked on with the New Testament. And the Quran has in it a lot of the things that the Torah says, that they also believe in. So there was never another Masorah. There was never another tradition. But there should have been many if the idea isn't started different and changed over 1,000 years. It should have changed 1,000 ways, not one way. And everybody has that same tradition today. It makes more sense to say it didn't change than it changed 1,000 ways the same way. There's only one problem with that. That's improbable. I mean, when you play telephone, it changes all the time. Why in the world would this tradition not change? That seems to be improbable. So I'll tell you why I think it's not improbable. Imagine if you have 100 people walking through the jungle, and they're separated by earshot, meaning number 1 and number 2 are right next to each other, but number 2 and number 3 are within range that they can hear each other. But nobody else can hear them. Number 2 can converse with number 3, but nobody past number 3. They're out of earshot. Number 3 can converse with number 2 and number 4, but nobody else. Only the people directly next to them. And they're walking through the jungle, and all of a sudden, at the same moment, they all sink to their waist in quicksand, or in the mud. And now they're a line of 100 people in the mud, can't move, separated the way I told you. 1 and 2 are right next to each other. 2 to 3 can converse with each other. 3 and 4 can converse. 3 and 2 can converse. Nobody else. And all of a sudden, number 1 starts to have convulsions. And number 2 is close to him. He can do something for him. He doesn't know what to do. And he realizes number 1's life is in danger if he doesn't do something. And he knows that number 100 is a doctor. So he yells to number 3, I'm going to describe to you exactly what are the symptoms that number 1 is exhibiting. I want you to yell to number 4 exactly what I tell you. And let number 4 yell that to number 5, all the way to the doctor. When the doctor hears the symptoms, I want him to yell back to 99 what I should do. And 99 to 98, all the way till it gets back to number 2. Do you think that the instructions or the symptoms will change as it goes down the line? Probably not. Why? Because people know they're not playing a game. When you play a game, it's fun if it changes. So nobody cares. But here, everybody knows that number 1's life depends on this. So if I don't give over the symptoms exactly as I heard them, I may be killing number one. So people take it pretty seriously. And when the doctor yells back what to do, number 99 listens very carefully because he knows that if he doesn't report it exactly as the doctor said, number one may die. And the same thing with 98 and 97. So when you're talking about something that people feel that their life depends on, and the people who passed on this tradition, the tradition of the Torah, not only believe that their lives depended on it in this world, they believed that their lives eternally depended on it. So when they gave over this Masorah, they were very careful to make sure that they didn't make any changes, that it was exactly as it was. And even with that, sometimes details were lost, but nothing more than that. Again, there was never another version of Kriyas Yamsuf, or another version of Matan Torah, or another version of Esher Makos. All was the same throughout history. So the fact that it didn't change is much more probable than it did change, because if it did, there should be 10, 15, 20, 100 different versions. So of all the possibilities that Moshe convinced an entire nation, and that's how the tradition started, or they made it up, or somebody made it up 1,000 years after that, or it happened but it didn't happen that way and it changed in the tradition and the giving over, the transmission. All of that is improbable. So what is the most probable that really happened? And it happened exactly the way the Torah says. So therefore, if you want to believe, there's tremendous support for your belief in Yetzias Mitzrayim. In the fact that something happened, purportedly happened in front of an entire nation. Very difficult to falsify that. If something started because somebody said it happened, so believe him, don't believe him. Because some people saw it, believe them, don't believe them. That's possible to falsify even at the outset. But that something, we have a tradition that something happened in front of an entire nation. The only way that that tradition could have developed is one of the 5 ways that I mentioned to you. And of them, all of them are improbable except the fact that it really happened. So again, if you don't want to believe, there are plenty of things you could say. That people believe that the Martians came and gave the Torah or whatever. You'd rather believe in Martians than in the Rabbanu Shalom Gesundheit. But you can think of anything, right? Harotza litos, a person who wants to make a mistake, can make a mistake and believe in anything. But if you want to believe and you want to look at objectively what seems to be proof to your belief, it may not be conclusive proof, but at least it gives you the chizuk, it gives you the support and the strength to make that decision. Because belief is a decision. It's a bechira. You have the right to make that decision, hopefully make the right decision. The Rebbeinu Shalom gave people the ability to choose, but if you want to make the right choice, there's a lot of support to support that choice. If you don't want to make the right choice, all the support in the world is not going to force you to believe. There's a place, there's a makom lito. Okay.
Good.
We're running late upstairs. We have a few extra minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Questions on, obviously it doesn't disagree, but it contradicts what you were saying at the beginning. You want to mess up, you want to mess up. I just want to ask about your proofs 4 and 3. I'm going to start with 4 first. You explained how it possibly happened and it was an over-exaggerated event, and over time, with the whole telephone analogy, that there's no way that everyone could have got the same story. At the same time, and also, in that same vein, that there's no other Masorah. But there are contradictions. We have Gemara, we have different sects of Judaism, we have different, obviously if you don't want to count Reform and Conservative, we have Hasidus, we have Haredi, we have Modern Orthodox, and not even that, the Christians and Muslims, what's their Masorah? It's the New Testament. So what we claim is our Masorah is the Gemara and everything we follow. Their Masorah is the New Testament or the Quran.
Okay, but the thrust of what I said is the following. Yes, they have a Messiah, they have a New Testament, but if you trace it back to its source, the source is something very shaky. The source is what one person claimed. There's no more proof to that than what Yeshua claimed to be the Son of God. Nobody can vouch or testify that that is the fact. You believe him, you don't believe him. So their Messiah starts with a very shaky thing. The fact that we have many different approaches to Yiddishkeit is no Chassid, no conservative Jew, no Reformed Jew, no Litvisha Jew have a different version of Kriyas Yamsuf. Right? The Reform may say, I don't believe it happened. But they don't say, well, I have another tradition that it happened, but they went scuba diving. It didn't split. You have no other tradition. They just don't believe it. But nobody from all of those, including the Christians and the Muslims, say that they have another tradition of how Kriyas Yamsuf happened. Right? They all believe that it was Kriyas Yamsuf. So if it changed over time, there should be other versions, and there were never. There are other details in how to approach Yiddishkeit that have nothing to do with Masorah. Right? Even with Kriyas Yamsuf, let's say there was an argument in the Medrash whether there were 12 paths or one path or whatever, right? If there was fruit growing, those are details. But the crux that was there at Kriyas Yamsuf didn't be split. Nobody argues on it. Now, all those sects, including the Goy. So that's the thrust of the argument.
So that leads.
Excuse me. You talk with too much self-confidence. Like you're God. Forgive me. Many years ago, I'm sorry.
Yeah, good. I want to learn something here.
When I came to Israel, Liechtenstein is nobody like him in the black movement, nobody close to him.